The mess hall exploded into chaos. Metal trays clattered to the floor. Inmates shouted over each other. Guards yelled for backup as fists flew from every direction. Someone had thrown hot soup, and it splashed across the wall, steaming in the cold air. Chairs flipped, the sound of boots thundered against the concrete, and in the middle of it all, Caleb Turner stood frozen, holding his tray. The fight had started over food, something as simple as who got the bigger piece of cornbread. But at Rikers Island, nothing stayed simple for long. Within seconds, the entire block was screaming. 2 men were locked in a brawl near the serving line, one bleeding from the forehead, the other swinging wildly. Caleb ducked as a tray flew past him and slammed into the wall. A guard shouted, "Lock it down." Everyone down now, but nobody listened. Another inmate grabbed a chair and hurled it across the room. The noise was deafening. Guards rushed in with shields, trying to break the fight apart, but there were too many people, too much chaos. Caleb hit the floor and covered his head. He could hear boots pounding closer, the clatter of batons against tables, and the constant, echoing command, "Down! Down!" Someone shouted in pain, another cried out for help. The smell of blood mixed with the sharp sting of cleaning chemicals and food. Then, out of nowhere, the alarm blared through the building, a deep, vibrating sound that made the walls tremble. Red lights flashed across the mess hall as more officers poured in. Caleb lifted his head for a moment and saw one of the fighters being tackled to the ground, his face pressed hard against the floor. For a moment, everything slowed down, the screaming, the shouting, the chaos. Caleb's eyes met another inmate's across the room. The man's look said everything, "Welcome to Rikers." Just as things started to calm, another voice shouted from the far corner, "He's got a knife." The room froze. Guards turned. Caleb couldn't see who had it, but the energy in the air changed instantly. The red lights flashed faster. The guards lunged forward. Caleb shut his eyes. Then there was a sound, a dull thud, then silence. And just like that, the fight was over. But for Caleb, it was only the beginning. That morning had started like any other. The clang of doors opening echoed through the cell block as guards shouted, "Breakfast! Let's go!" The smell of oatmeal drifted down the corridor, mixed with something burnt and sour. Caleb sat up on his bunk, rubbing his eyes. The ceiling above him was cracked, a spiderweb of peeling paint. Another day, he whispered to himself. He'd been here for 4 months now, and every day felt the same. He shared his cell with Raymond, a man in his 40s with sharp eyes and a quiet voice. Raymond had been at Rikers before. "Stay invisible," he always said. "That's how you survive." They lined up for breakfast, cold eggs, stale toast, and watery coffee. Caleb kept to himself, watching the guards pace back and forth. The air was thick with noise, the clinking of trays, laughter that didn't sound real, and the occasional argument that could turn dangerous in seconds. After breakfast, inmates were allowed into the yard. The sky was gray, the air cold. Some men worked out using makeshift weights, while others huddled in corners talking. Caleb walked the perimeter, counting steps in his head. The walls around the yard were high, topped with rolls of razor wire that glinted in the pale sun. He could see the distant skyline of New York City beyond the water, so close yet impossible to reach. Later, when lunch came, tensions were already high. Word had spread that one inmate had been shorted during breakfast. Food meant everything here: respect, survival, and sometimes even power. By the time dinner rolled around, everyone was on edge. Caleb sat with Raymond and a few others at a table near the back of the mess hall. He tried to eat slowly, minding his own business, but arguments broke out 2 tables away. At first, it was just yelling. Then one tray flipped. Raymond whispered, "Here we go again." Within seconds, the shouting turned to fighting. A cup hit the floor. Then another. And then the room erupted. Guards rushed in, but it was too late. The fight spread like fire. Caleb grabbed his tray and ducked, but the chaos surrounded him. He tried to move toward the wall, but someone shoved him back. And then, the flash of something shiny. Someone had pulled a weapon. Caleb froze as the crowd screamed. A guard blew his whistle. Red lights began to flash. He dropped his tray and hit the ground as the alarm roared above him. He could hear the guards shouting orders, batons striking metal tables. The fight didn't stop, it only got louder. Then he heard Raymond's voice. "Get down, Caleb. Don't move." Caleb pressed his face against the cold floor. His heart was racing. This wasn't just another argument. This was about to turn into something much worse. The alarm grew louder. Guards poured in. The sound of boots echoed everywhere. Caleb shut his eyes, praying it would stop. Then, through the chaos, someone screamed in pain. And suddenly, the lights went out. Everything turned black. The shouting stopped. The guards froze. For a long, terrifying moment, there was nothing but the sound of breathing in the dark. The lights flickered back on, revealing a mess of overturned tables, spilled food, and terrified faces. The smell of sweat and metal hung heavy in the air. Guards rushed through the hall, shouting commands, their boots splashing through puddles of soup and coffee. Caleb stayed down, his hands over his head, heart pounding so hard he could hear it. "Everyone against the wall," one guard yelled, his baton pointing toward the crowd. "Move it, now." Slowly, the noise began to die down. The fighters were dragged out first, hands cuffed, faces bruised. One of them was bleeding badly from the arm. Another was crying, mumbling that he hadn't done anything. Caleb watched silently as a guard slipped on spilled beans and cursed under his breath. Raymond leaned close and whispered, "Now they'll lock the whole place down for days." Caleb said nothing. He couldn't stop staring at the red stain on the floor. It didn't look like food. A few minutes later, the warden himself appeared, a tall man with tired eyes and a voice that filled the room. "Everyone back to your cells. This block is on lockdown until further notice." The crowd groaned but didn't argue. No one ever argued with the warden. As they marched back to their cells, Caleb glanced at the kitchen window. He could still see the steam rising from the half-cooked food trays, now scattered across the floor like battlefield debris. A single metal spoon clattered as a guard kicked it aside. When the door slammed shut behind him, the silence was almost worse than the noise. Hours passed. The red emergency lights still blinked in the hallway. Guards patrolled constantly, their radios crackling with static. Inside the cell, Raymond was pacing. "This is how it always goes," he muttered. "They'll blame everyone. Doesn't matter who started it." Caleb sat on the bunk, thinking about what he'd seen, the flash of the knife, the screaming, the lights going out. He still didn't know who got hurt, or if anyone died. The smell of smoke drifted in from somewhere down the hall. "Think they're cooking again?" Caleb asked quietly. Raymond shook his head. "No. That's from C Block. They set a trash can on fire last week. Guess they're at it again." The two men sat in silence for a while. Every few minutes, they heard a clang or shout from another cell. Lockdowns had a way of turning people restless. Later that night, the warden's voice echoed through the intercom. "Inmates of Red Tier, this is day 1 of lockdown. Meals will be brought to your cells. No recreation. No phone calls." Raymond sighed. "Told you. Get comfortable." The next few days blurred together. Guards slid trays through the bars 3 times a day. Cold sandwiches, watery soup, and sometimes just bread. The air grew heavy, thick with frustration. Without movement or sunlight, time lost all meaning. Caleb tried to keep himself calm. He cleaned his bunk, read scraps of old newspapers, and listened. That's what most men did on lockdown. Listen. Every sound mattered. The distant footsteps of guards. The coughs from the next cell. The sudden clang of metal when someone lost their temper. On the 3rd night, someone down the hall started singing. It was a low, shaky voice, but it carried through the corridor. The song was old, maybe something from church. Slowly, other voices joined in. Quietly, carefully, as if afraid the guards would stop them. Raymond looked up from his bunk. "That's new," he whispered. Caleb nodded. "Maybe it's the only way they can feel free." The singing went on for a few minutes before a guard shouted, "Quiet down." The voices stopped instantly, replaced by silence once again. A week later, the lockdown finally ended. The gates opened slowly, and guards called out names for work duty and recreation. Caleb stepped out into the corridor, blinking at the harsh fluorescent light. It felt strange to walk again, to move freely even inside the walls. In the yard, the air was cold but fresh. The sky above was pale gray, and the city skyline shimmered faintly beyond the water. Caleb looked around. Same faces, same walls, same barbed wire, but something felt heavier than before. The fight had changed everything. Some inmates were gone, moved to isolation or transferred. The mess hall was closed for repairs, and rumors spread that someone hadn't survived the stabbing. No one knew for sure. Raymond joined him near the fence. "You see what I mean?" he said quietly. "Food, fights, lockdowns, it's the same story every time. Rikers doesn't change. It just repeats itself." Caleb stared through the fence toward the faint outline of Manhattan. "Yeah," he said softly. "And every day you wake up, you just hope it's not your turn to end up in the next story." A guard blew a whistle. Recreation time was over. As Caleb walked back toward the block, he could hear the buzz of the city faintly across the water, a reminder that life outside kept moving while everything inside stayed frozen. Back in his cell, he lay on his bunk, staring at the ceiling. The sound of keys jingled somewhere down the hall. Someone coughed. Someone laughed. And somewhere deep in the block, a voice started humming that same slow song again. Caleb closed his eyes, listening. For a moment, it almost sounded peaceful, like freedom trapped behind steel bars. Then the lights flickered once more, and a guard's voice barked, "Lock down again. Everyone back in." The sound of slamming doors echoed through the corridor. And just like that, the cycle began all over again.